Landscape with a building overview. To begin the project, we started developing our understanding of one-point linear perspective with three boxes, one on eye level, one above eye level, and one below eye level. And then we put values in place with a light source coming from the upper right-hand corner of the picture. From there, we moved to the understanding and development of two-point linear perspective with a box on eye level, a box above eye level, and a box below eye level with two vanishing points on the horizon line. Notice that we see two edges of the boxes going to two different vanishing points, whereas with the one-point perspective we had one vanishing point for each of the boxes' edges to go to, not two. On those faces of those boxes, we still had one light source at the upper right corner of the picture frame, and that developed our contrasting values for each of the faces so that they stood out from each other and contrasted with each other. That's two-point linear perspective. From then, we went to aerial perspective. Aerial perspective, in that we develop a foreground, middle ground, and background, and we used two-point and one-point linear perspective to put a building, some streets, and some sidewalks in place. And then we used foreground, middle ground, and background of aerial perspective to create a sense of space and depth with placement of objects on the ground. So we have one tree in the foreground, one tree in the middle ground, and in my picture I have one in the far background. There are also mountains in the background. The building itself is in what we call the far foreground or the middle ground. The streets and sidewalks go from the foreground into the background at the horizon. From there, we developed our understanding of trees. We drew a pine tree, an oak or elm type tree, and a palm tree. We learned how to put their basic structure in place with line, and then we developed a marking system to make each one of them look believably three-dimensional. The marking systems create values and textures at the same time. Our next step is to put it all together. What we learned about each of the different perspectives, one-point perspective, two-point perspective, aerial perspective, and the marking systems for value building. Notice that there are very few places on this drawing where there's actually white paper. Almost all of the paper has been developed with either marking systems like we've done with the trees above, or with blending techniques that we've already learned in class. I recommend that you do a combination for visual interest, but you could stick with one technique or another. The whole idea here, though, is to create the believability of depth and space. So you're going to create value differences on each of the faces of the buildings and other three-dimensional objects that make them look three-dimensional. You'll need one light source hitting all the objects in the picture to enhance that believability. If you don't think about where the sun is, you're not going to be able to create believability in your overall composition. Notice the few places where there's pure white paper. There are some clouds up in the upper middle part of the picture. There are some highlights on the mountains. There's some highlights on the windows, and there's some highlights on the rocks. Everything else is a little bit darker than the white paper. That's your job.